afternoon. I'm delighted to be your host and your moderator for the next couple of hours, where we're going to listen to 3 papers on today's topic. Our first session today is under the heading 1920, Annus Mirabilis unto the Churches of Christ Everywhere, and appeal to all Christian people. We have 3 speakers. Our first speaker is Reverend Dr. Odair Pedroso Mateus from the World Council of Churches. Dr. Mateus is an interim, is the interim deputy General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. He's director of the WCC Commission on Faith and Order, and he's also a lecturer on ecumenical theology at the WCC Ecumenical Institute in Bosse, Switzerland. Dr. Mateus will speak on under the heading the 1920 Encyclical and the Self-Understanding of the World Council of Churches. So may I invite you, Reverend Dr. Odair Pedroso Mateus, to take the floor and to use your 15 to 20 minutes with your paper, please. Thank you.
During this year, I've been dedicating a couple of short texts on 1920 in the ecumenical movement. And the first one was called A Beautiful Letter from the Church of Constantinople. And it was dedicated precisely to the Encyclical. And the second was dedicated to the Lambeth Appeal. So I'm very happy to be in a conference which is addressing those 2 documents. What I want to do in this is more focused, and it may require some attention in relation to some of the expressions that I will be using. I will concentrate my remarks on a person called Willem Visserhoofd. This is one element to be kept. The second one, I will also refer to a document that I'll be calling Toronto Statement. So if you hear it, you'll be familiar with that. And thirdly, I will refer to the Encyclical in relation then to the self-understanding of the WCC that has a lot to do with this Toronto Statement. So I will start by saying that towards the end of his life, the architect and first General Secretary of the World Council of Churches published a book called The Genesis and Formation of the World Council of Churches. So the title, The Genesis and Formation of the World Council of Churches, suggests a chronological narrative of the process leading to the establishment of the World Council of Churches. And this is largely so. In its 20 short chapters, Visserhoofd will lead the reader from the initial ideas of an ecumenical council in 1918, for instance, to the establishment of the WCC in 1948, when it held its first assembly and adopted its constitution. But there are 2 chapters that escape a bit that sequence, that strict chronological sequence. And I will not say anything for the moment about the first that escapes, but I want to say something about the second that escapes. And the second chapter that escapes that sequence is the last one in the book. And this is dedicated precisely to a document that was drafted confidentially in dialogue with Roman Catholic theologians in 1949 and adopted by the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches in Toronto in 1950. That's why we call it Toronto Statement. Its official name is the Churches and the World Council of Churches. So this means that for Wisserhoft, the formation of the WCC is not accomplished in the first assembly. There is something more to that, and it's the need for the WCC to explain itself in relation to the church, the churches, and itself, the WCC. So this is this document called Toronto Statement. What is this document about? I will briefly indicate to you the main sections of this document and the main topics it deals with. The first point is about the authority of this new, unprecedented organization called World Council of Churches. The WCC has no authority on itself. It's in the service of the churches. Another element, the WCC does not intend to be a super church that is emerging through this structure. The WCC does not negotiate church union. It's the churches themselves that do that. Membership in the WCC does not imply that a specific church is embracing one specific ecclesiology and consequently one specific understanding of unity. So these are some of the things that this new organization is not. But what is then the WCC? This comes in section 4th of that document, which is called Assumptions Underlining the World Council of Churches. So, in that section, the text says that relations among the churches are based on the affirmation of Christ as the divine head of the body. Second, the churches in this fellowship affirm that the Church of Christ is one. The oneness of the church is a fundamental element in the life of this fellowship, and in the absence of this reference, the ecumenical challenge doesn't make much sense. Another important affirmation in that section is that membership in the Church of Christ is more inclusive than membership of this or that member church. And after that membership in this fellowship does not mean that one church is obliged or necessarily or automatically recognizes the other as the one church of Jesus Christ in its full sense. But in any case, each member church recognizes in the other churches elements of the true church. So this is basically the most important affirmations of the Toronto Statement. The last chapter of Wisserhoft's book from the 80s on the genesis and formation of the WCC. Now, what was then the first chapter? And of course, here we come to the topic that we are taking into consideration this evening. The first chapter of Wisserhoft's book is dedicated to the 1920 Encyclical of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It was not the first time when the idea of a league of churches or of an ecumenical council of churches was evoked, but it is the first chapter of the book. Wisserhoft intentionally places his pages on the encyclical in as the first chapter of the book. Well, we could ask ourselves, but why then it's there? Is it because the encyclical and the covering letter of the encyclical propose a league of churches? This could be a possibility, a possible answer. Is this because it's the call of a church to the ecumenical movement? This could also be a possible answer. Was it because the encyclical adopts a kind of as-if ecumenical strategy that was later on embraced by the movement on life and work and so forth, that he places the encyclical at the outset as the first chapter of his book? Well, these answers are possible, but I would like briefly to go beyond that in the 5 minutes that are left for my presentation. My answer requires briefly that we go back to 1959. In 1959, the WCC holds for the first time a Central Committee meeting hosted by an Orthodox church, and this takes place in Rhodos, Greece. And here comes, in the address, in the report of the General Secretary, no other than Visserhoft, here comes the encyclical of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. 1 year before it celebrates its 40th anniversary, 1 year before the Orthodox churches in the Eastern Bloc take the decision of joining the WCC in New Delhi in 1961, Visserhoft brings back the encyclical to discussion and to the attention of the highest governing body of the World Council of Churches under its assembly. And he wants to present a new English translation of the encyclical. At that point, in that year, Visserhoft is working, and this is important, on a theology, on an ecumenical theology for the interim. He feels the need to develop an ecumenical theology that could accompany the churches, which are no longer simply in a situation of isolation, but which are not yet in full communion with each other. So he wants to propose an ecumenical theology of the in-between times. And this takes the shape of a series of lectures that he gives at Yale Divinity School in 1957, and which are published in 1959, exactly in the year in which he presents the new English translation of the encyclical. And the book, Visserhoft's book, is called "The Pressure of Our Common Calling," and he asks in that book, how does unity grow? How can the churches move from isolation to a growth in fellowship? And one of his answers in that book is on page 26, and I'm reading now, is like that. There is no way for churches which are neither fully united nor completely separated to arrive at real, concrete, manifest unity except the way of common obedience to the common calling. And that's the expression that gives title to the book. And for those of you who are familiar with ecumenical text appears in the first article of the WCC constitution. The churches will grow in unity if they accomplish together their common calling. And their common calling is to be the church and to be the church in mission. So the different chapters of this book will develop that idea of growing in unity by being together churches in mission, witness, service, and koinonia. communion. Now, why a new translation of the Encyclical? The WCC presents a new translation of the Encyclical, English translation of the Encyclical in 1959 in order to underline its lasting significance. And one of the important elements in that is to clarify the use that the Encyclical makes of the term koinonia. So in his address in 1959, he says to the Central Committee that the Encyclical works with this term, with the notion of koinonia in two senses, in the New Testament sense and in the modern sense. And he argues that the invitation of the Church of Constantinople to create a league of churches carries the two combined senses of this term. So, in the New Testament sense, this invitation is made clear when the Encyclical calls the churches to look at each other as members of the same body. So the Encyclical invites the churches separated in their separation to look at each other as members of the same body. And in order to support his statement, his claim that the invitation to create a league of churches, the text in the text includes these two senses, he quotes Metropolitan Germanus, who will be the object of a coming paper. He quotes Metropolitan Germanus in a lecture given in Uppsala in 1929. And Metropolitan Germanus refers precisely to this passage, and he says, Metropolitan, I quote, "How wide the conception in which the Encyclical teaches at this point becomes clear in that it widens, the Encyclical widens the notion of the relationships between the member churches of every single church as members of the one and the same body according to St. Paul's wonderful teaching, so as to apply to the relationships between the several churches." End of quotation. So, and I'm coming to the conclusion, for Wisserhoft, the lasting significance of this first chapter, the reason why he places the text, his comments on the Encyclical as the first chapter of his book, is that this is a theological mirror to the last chapter on the self-understanding of the WCC. What is implied in the use of the term koinonia in the Encyclical? A communion that transcends the limits of our different traditions, churches, or denominations. Resonates with the elements of the true church that are included in the early self-understanding of the World Council of Churches, and this is one of the important dimensions of the significance of the Encyclical for the World Council of Churches and for the ecumenical movement. Thank you very much.